Hey guys, tonight we're heading out into the kind of weather that makes you question every life choice that brought you here. You're trudging into a medieval snowstorm, the sort that swallows the landscape and turns the whole world into a blinding, icy blur. The air is so thick with snow, you can barely see your own feet, and every step is a gamble between packed ice and a drift that might swallow you thigh deep. Somewhere out there, there's shelter. Or maybe there isn't. And the bad news? In the Middle Ages, if you got lost in a storm like this, you probably wouldn't survive. Not without a few tricks, and not without a whole lot of luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love for you to post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push forward, boots crunching against the ice. Your breath turning instantly to crystals in front of your face. In the Middle Ages, snow gear meant wool, fur, and layers of linen, not waterproof parkas and insulated hiking boots. Every layer you wore got heavier the wetter it became, and once the wind pushed snow into every fold, you were essentially wearing a mobile ice chest. Wool, to be fair, is surprisingly good at keeping you warm even when damp. But you still feel the cold biting through, nibbling at your fingers like impatient rats. Navigation? Forget about it. Medieval maps were charmingly useless for anything but general bragging rights. Half the time they were covered in dragons or blank terra incognita spaces. In a snowstorm, you relied on landmarks, a crooked tree, a distinctive boulder, the angle of a church steeple in the distance. But tonight, every landmark is erased, replaced by the same ghost-white horizon in every direction. It's like walking through the inside of a pillow factory, if the factory wanted you dead. A more practical trick some travelers used was to follow the lay of the land. Snow drifts differently on hillsides and in valleys. Wind patterns create sculpted ridges called sastrugi that can point you toward or away from civilization. You try to read the snow's shape, but every gust reshapes it before you can decide if it's a path or a trap. And that's where the stubborn will comes in. You don't stop walking because you know stopping in cold this deep is the fastest route to becoming part of the scenery. One historical account from the 14th century tells of a group of merchants caught in a sudden blizzard while crossing the Alps. They formed a human chain, tying themselves together with rope so no one wandered off the path entirely. It worked, mostly. One unlucky man was swept off his feet by a drift and dangled over a slope until the others hauled him back up, reportedly with frostbite already setting in. Historians still argue whether they were heading to trade in salt or furs. But either way, the cargo was secondary to staying alive. The quirky thing is, medieval folk sometimes carried charms for protection against winter spirits. A tiny bag of salt, a scrap of iron, or even a little lump of bread from the last meal at home. Because nothing says, "Please don't freeze me," like carbs. You pat your own pouch, wondering if you should have packed something more magical than a half-eaten hunk of cheese. Every now and then, you think you see shapes in the snow. A tree, maybe? Or is it just your brain playing with the shadows? You lean into the wind, which slaps your face like it's personally offended you. The temperature keeps dropping. Your fingers are tingling, but the tingling is good. It means you can still feel them. Once they go numb, you're in trouble. You flex your hands, imagining the countless travelers who must have done the song centuries before, clutching whatever crude walking stick or staff they had, trudging forward, one slow step at a time. There's no clock here, no way to measure how long you've been walking. It could be minutes or hours. The snow makes the world timeless and endless. You're not so much moving through it as you are pushing against it like wading through milk. And somewhere deep down, you know the real danger isn't getting lost. It's that you might stop caring whether you're found. That's hypothermia's cruelest trick, convincing you that lying down in the snow for just a moment is a good idea. Still, you keep moving, scanning for the faintest suggestion of shelter. A darker patch in the storm could be a line of trees. A dip in the land might mean a stream bed, frozen over now, but maybe leading toward a settlement. Somewhere in the white void, there has to be a way forward, or at least a place to stop without freezing to death immediately. Your breath rattles in your throat, each exhale caught and stolen by the wind. The storm doesn't care about you, but you're determined to make it through anyway. You almost don't notice the change at first, just a subtle shift in the sound of the wind, a muffling of the endless hiss. Then you realize you've wandered into the lee side of a slope, where the snow piles more gently, and the air doesn't bite quite so hard. It's not much, but in weather like this, any break from the wind feels like stepping into another world. Your mind shifts to the next priority, finding a place to hunker down. In the Middle Ages, people knew that surviving the cold meant mastering the art of using whatever was at hand. Out in the wild, at hand could mean a hollow oak tree, an abandoned shepherd's hut, or even a snowdrift itself. Yes, snow can kill you, but it can also save you. The trick is to make it work for you before it buries you. Snow caves were one of the more ingenious emergency shelters. You'd find a deep drift, dig inward and slightly upward to trap the warm air, and block the entrance with snow or a bundle of branches. It sounds counterintuitive, sleeping inside what's trying to freeze you, but a good snow cave could keep the temperature inside just below freezing, which feels almost tropical compared to the blizzard outside. You crouch down near a drift now, running your gloved hand along its crusty surface, wondering if you could make it hollow without the whole thing collapsing. If you were lucky enough to be in wooded terrain, shelter might take the form of a fallen tree with its root ball torn up, leaving a natural alcove. Travelers sometimes wove branches together to create windbreaks, layering them with moss and snow for insulation. You remember reading that medieval hunters would sometimes dig into a bank, stack their packs and cloaks as makeshift walls, and light a tiny fire in front of them. It wasn't comfortable, but then again, neither is frostbite. A mainstream fact worth noting: even in medieval towns, winter travel was so dangerous that many communities set up snow posts along major paths, tall wooden markers that stuck out above the drifts to guide people. Out here, there's no such help, only your wits. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you can imagine the comfort of spotting one of those poles, leaning slightly under the weight of snow, pointing the way home. Then, there are the more curious survival techniques, like stuffing your clothing with dry grass or moss to trap heat. It's itchy, sure, but the extra insulation could mean the difference between shivering and slipping into hypothermia. Some chroniclers even mention lining boots with sheep's wool soaked in animal fat to keep the feet warm and supposedly water resistant. You can't help but imagine medieval travelers squelching around with their feet smelling faintly of roasted mutton. The storm around you feels endless, but you know you have to choose. Keep moving or dig in. There's a fringe theory that some medieval wanderers in desperate situations would follow wolves or dogs they spotted in the snow, betting the animals would eventually lead them to shelter, or at least somewhere out of the worst of the wind. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely practiced or just one of those travelers' tales people told over ale in warmer months. Still, you glance out into the swirling white, half hoping to see a shaggy tail vanish into the distance. You spot something dark up ahead, low, uneven, but solid against the wind's force. Your pulse jumps. As you draw closer, you realize it's a cluster of boulders, half buried in snow. Not much, but their bulk offers a shield from the gusts. Between them is a narrow gap, just wide enough to crawl through. You push inside, grateful for the sudden quiet. It's not truly warm, but it's warmer than the open storm. In here, the snow settles on your shoulders instead of in your face. You take a moment to catch your breath, listening to the muffled world beyond the rocks. This is survival in its most stripped-down form. Not about comfort, not even about rest, just about buying enough time for the storm to pass. And that's the unspoken truth of medieval travel in winter. Half the skill was knowing when to stop, and the other half was knowing how to keep going afterward. You look around the cramped shelter, thinking about those who came before you. Pilgrims trudging to distant shrines, peddlers hauling their wares from one frostbitten village to another, messengers carrying news that could be weeks late thanks to storms like this. They would have found their own alcoves, caves, or huts, shared body heat with horses or dogs, and endured the night with nothing more than a blanket and a stubborn refusal to give up. You draw your cloak tighter, press your back to the rock, and listen as the wind's voice rises again outside. Somewhere out there, the snow is still falling, piling higher. But for now, you've carved out your little corner of safety. Tomorrow, you'll move again. Tonight, you wait. You wake, or at least you think you wake, to the sound of your own teeth chattering. The storm outside hasn't eased much, but your body knows it's time to deal with the next problem: warmth. You pull your knees to your chest, tucking your chin down, trying to keep the precious heat from slipping away. It's a basic human instinct, older than the Middle Ages by thousands of years, and it's one you're relying on now like a well-worn tool. Medieval people understood cold in a way we rarely do now. For them, staying warm wasn't just about surviving a blizzard. It was part of daily life for half the year. They knew how to layer wool tunics over linen shifts, how to wrap a cloak so it doubled as a blanket, and how to line the inside of a hood with fur so it trapped the breath's warmth against their face. But when you're caught outside, with snow piling against the rocks, you have to improvise. One tried and true tactic was the medieval fire bundle. You'd gather whatever dry tinder you could, bark, moss, twigs, and light it with a flint spark. If the wind was too fierce, you'd dig into the snow to make a wind-proof pocket for the fire. You imagine yourself crouched there, hands cupped over a fragile flame, coaxing it like it's a stubborn child refusing to wake for school. It's not easy. Snowstorms have a knack for finding every gap in your protection and snuffing out anything warm. Mainstream fact. Most medieval travelers didn't carry large, ready-to-use firewood. It was simply too heavy. Instead, they relied on finding deadfall branches or scavenging from abandoned huts. That's why the skill of finding shelter often came first. Because without something solid to block the wind, a fire could be more trouble than it was worth. Then, there's the quirky side of warmth. Heated stones. Travelers sometimes buried stones in the embers of a fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them inside their clothes to radiate heat as they walked. You picture yourself waddling across the snow with a lumpy, rock-filled tunic, trying not to trip over your own uneven weight. And yet, in a storm like this, the idea doesn't seem so silly. Isolation, though, that's another battle entirely. Out here, with nothing but the wind's howl for company, your mind starts to play tricks. You begin to notice patterns in the snow, hear faint voices in the gusts, remember things you thought you'd forgotten. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers recognized these as signs of hypothermia or simply thought them the work of spirits. Either way, too much time alone in the cold could break a person as surely as frostbite. You think of the sagas and folk tales where winter was personified as a relentless hunter, always behind you, never stopping. To medieval minds, the cold wasn't just weather, it was a force with intent. That's why they told stories about it. Stories were a kind of insulation for the mind, a way to stay anchored when the white void made everything else feel like it was slipping away. You shift inside your rocky alcove, pulling a scrap of wool tighter around your shoulders. You can almost hear the hum of a medieval hearth in some distant inn, the hiss of meat roasting, the soft murmur of voices trading news. You cling to that imagined warmth because it's one of the few things that can keep your mind steady out here. Another practical tactic: keep moving, even in place. Stamping your feet, swinging your arms, clapping your hands. It's the medieval equivalent of a modern hiker doing jumping jacks in a snowstorm. You try a few steps back and forth, careful not to stray too far from your shelter. It works. The numbness in your toes fades to a sharp tingling, which is the body's way of saying, "Congratulations, you're still alive, for now." Of course, there were more desperate measures too. Some medieval accounts mention sharing cloaks, and even lying side by side under them for warmth, regardless of social rank. You imagine a high-born merchant huddled next to a barefoot peasant, both too cold to care about etiquette. Survival has a way of rearranging priorities. The night drags on, every gust outside reminding you that the storm still has the upper hand. You poke at the embers of your tiny fire, more aglow than a flame now, trying to stretch its life a little longer. Outside, the wind shifts again, and for a moment, it almost sounds like it's calling you by name. You shake your head. It's just the storm. Just the storm. When you finally close your eyes, it's not for deep sleep, but for a kind of guarded rest. Your ears stay tuned to the sounds outside, listening for change, because you know that the moment the wind begins to soften, it will be time to move again. When the change comes, it's almost too subtle to trust. The wind that's been clawing at the rocks all night fades to a gentler sigh, and the snow's relentless hiss becomes a slower, softer patter. You open your eyes, your breath curling upward in pale ribbons, and realize the storm's grip has loosened. It's time to go. You pack your few things: the wool scrap, the dwindling tinder, the stubborn lump of cheese, and step out from your shelter. The landscape is transformed. Where last night's chaos erased the world, now the snow lies smooth and heavy, sculpted into soft dunes under a cold blue sky. It's breathtaking and also deeply unsettling. Beauty is nice, but beauty won't get you home. In the Middle Ages, finding your way back in these conditions was half skill, half instinct. Without compasses as we know them, you relied on what the natural world offered: the position of the sun, the shape of tree shadows, and, if the sky was clear at night, the unwavering point of the North Star. You squint upward now, noting where the sun hovers and adjusting your path accordingly. Another classic navigation trick was to follow animal tracks. Deer often led toward water, and water often meant villages. Dogs or goats could lead to farmsteads. In some regions, people even looked for the patterns of crows or ravens. These birds often circled near human settlements, where scraps were easier to find. Historians still argue whether such methods were widely practiced or mostly exaggerated in travelers' tales. But out here, you're ready to believe anything that points you toward safety. You find yourself scanning the snow for disturbances, a broken crust where something heavy has passed, a faint trail winding between drifts. Your breath fogs in front of you as you move. Step by step, you follow a shallow depression, not entirely sure whether it's the remnant of an old road or just a trick of the wind. Mainstream fact: medieval communities, in particularly snowy regions, sometimes built snow bridges or packed paths over drifts to keep routes open. These were maintained collectively, with neighbors taking turns breaking trails after storms. Out here alone, you're missing that advantage, but your feet begin to recognize a rhythm in the ground beneath the snow, a firmness that might be a buried track. You also recall the oddest navigational aid you've heard of. In some isolated valleys, locals set up tall poles topped with bundles of straw to mark the way through dangerous snowfields. The straw wasn't for visibility alone. It doubled as emergency fodder for animals if travelers became stranded. You keep half an eye out for any such marker, though here, in this white desert, nothing breaks the skyline. As you press forward, the cold still gnaws at your edges, but movement brings heat. The sky deepens in color. The pale sun climbs higher. The land begins to change. Trees stand closer together. The drifts are less wind-carved, and the snow here is softer underfoot. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faint trickle of water, muffled under ice. It's the first sound that doesn't belong to the storm, and it's strangely comforting. You follow the sound, weaving between the trees, until you find a narrow stream, frozen at the edges, but running dark at its heart. You know water is life, but here, it's also direction. Streams have a way of leading you somewhere. You trace its winding course, passing beneath low branches and over small ridges. Then, in the distance, You catch it, smoke, faint and gray against the sky, curling from a point where the trees seem to break. Your heart kicks up. Smoke means fire. Fire means people, and people mean warmth. You push harder now, ignoring the protest in your legs, your breath coming in sharp bursts. When you finally break into the clearing, you see it, a small timber hut, roof heavy with snow, a thin column of smoke rising from its chimney. The sight is almost surreal after so long in the white emptiness. You imagine the medieval wanderers who must have felt the same relief, stumbling into an inn's flickering doorway or a stranger's cottage, knowing that for this night, at least, they'd be spared the cold's slow claim. You step toward the hut, each crunch of snow under your boots carrying you out of the storm's grasp and into safety. The journey's not over. You'll have stories to tell, lessons to remember. But for now, the only thing that matters is the heat on your face and the promise of rest. And now, as you imagine stepping inside that small timber hut, let the sounds soften in your mind. The door closes behind you with a muted thud, sealing away the last traces of the storm. Inside, the air is warm and heavy with the scent of wood smoke. The walls glow with the amber light of a low fire, the shadows stretching lazily across the floor. You let your shoulders relax, shrugging off the damp weight of your cloak. Your fingers, stiff from hours in the cold, begin to loosen. The sound of the wind is only a faint hum now, distant and harmless. You can almost hear the soft pop of the logs in the hearth, the slow crackle as the fire breathes. There's a stool near the flames, and you settle onto it, feeling the heat soak through the fabric of your clothes and into your bones. The flickering light lulls your eyes half closed. Outside, the snow continues to fall, but it no longer matters. You're in a place where time has paused, where the cold cannot reach you. You take in the stillness, the way every sound seems wrapped in cotton, every movement slowed. The fire burns low, casting a steady glow that feels less like light and more like comfort itself. And in this space, safe from the storm, your breath slows. Your thoughts wander gently, unhurried, like the last drifting flakes outside. Whatever paths tomorrow might bring, for now, there is only warmth and the quiet company of your own steady heartbeat. Rest here. Let the world outside fade away. The snow can keep its endless white. You found your way through it, and now you can simply drift. The world outside your mind has faded almost completely now. You can feel the quiet pressing in, like a soft tide against the shore. There is no need to move quickly. Time here is endless. The voices of the past are still speaking, but more softly now, like they know you're almost asleep. Let's follow them into the next shadowed corner of history. We're stepping off the deck of a creaking longship and straight into the kind of cold that makes your eyelashes turn to tiny icicles before you've even finished blinking. The air smells of salt and wood smoke. The tide crackles against a frozen shore. And the wind, well, the wind is basically trying to peel your face off. You've just made landfall on a bleak northern coast, the kind of place where even the gulls look like they regret living here. The plan? Survive the night without freezing solid. The reality? You probably won't survive this, unless you've got some Viking stubbornness in your bones. You step off the plank and onto the ice-crusted sand, boots crunching against a shore that doesn't quite know if it's beach or glacier. The ship groans behind you as the crew drags it higher up the beach, away from the creeping tide. A longship isn't just a means of transport, it's your lifeline. Losing it here would mean walking home across hundreds of miles of hostile land, which sounds like the kind of adventure only a saga lover would enjoy telling, and absolutely no one would enjoy doing. The sky above is smeared with the last fading streaks of sunset. Orange, giving way to violet. Violet to a creeping, star-pricked indigo. You take a moment to scan the shoreline. Rocky outcrops jut up like black teeth from the snow. Beyond them, a sparse scattering of low shrubs and ice-warped trees sway in the wind. Somewhere inland, there may be shelter, but inland also means the possibility of meeting locals who might not be thrilled about uninvited traders parking on their shore. Mainstream fact: Viking traders often beached their ships at dusk to avoid navigating in the dark, especially in icy waters where a hidden rock could spell disaster. The beaching was deliberate and coordinated, oarsmen rowing hard while the helmsman guided the keel onto a shallow slope, followed by a quick unloading of cargo before frost could set in. You join the crew in hauling crates and barrels down onto the hard-packed sand, your breath coming in short, white bursts. You feel the weight of a sealed barrel under your hands, the wood cold and smooth. Inside might be furs, amber, walrus ivory, items bound for trade at a distant market. And maybe, just maybe, one or two barrels hold something far more practical for tonight: ale or mead. Quirky tidbit: Vikings sometimes brewed drinks strong enough to warm the blood, and in cold weather, that phrase was taken very literally. Whether it actually kept anyone warm is debatable, but it certainly kept spirits up. As the last of the cargo is unloaded, the ship is tilted slightly to rest on her keel, a common trick to keep the hull from freezing fast to the ground. Some of the crew start stripping down the sail, folding the heavy woolen cloth into a bundle that will later serve as a windbreak or even a tent roof. Others are scouting up the beach, looking for high ground that's both sheltered from the wind and defensible. You follow one of the scouts past a cluster of icy boulders. Beyond them, a crescent of land rises gently before dropping into a frozen tidal pool. From here, you can see the ship, the shoreline, and the expanse of dark water beyond. All essential if you don't want to be surprised in the night by either a raiding party or the sudden return of the tide. Historians still argue whether Viking camps were primarily defensive or simply practical, but standing here, you realize they were probably both. The wind picks up again, and you pull your cloak tighter. The night is coming quickly now, each breath of air sharper than the last. Down below, the crew is already dragging driftwood and ice-slick logs toward the chosen campsite. Soon, the frozen shore will glow with the light of a fire, and you'll be one step closer to making it through the long northern night. You wake to the sound of ice groaning under the weight of the tide, the low, mournful creaks carrying through the thin walls of your tent. Your breath forms little ghosts in the dim air, each one vanishing into the shadows as you pull on the still damp tunic you hung too close to the tent wall last night. The cold here is patient. It lingers in the weave of your clothing, in the leather seams of your boots, in the bones of your fingers. It doesn't go away. You just learn to move with it. The camp is quiet, except for a few muffled coughs and the occasional clink of metal from someone already at the forge. Beyond the campfires, the great stretch of frozen shore seems to go on forever, merging into a horizon that blurs in the haze of blowing snow. Today is a trading day, and you feel the quiet urgency in the air. You step carefully over the frozen ridges, watching as figures from other camps emerge. Some wrapped in heavy furs, dyed with strange colors that catch the light in muted glints. Others carry carved boxes, their shapes unmistakable even beneath layers of frost. These are the portable vaults of their wealth, and the sound of coins and beads shifting within is as enticing as the smell of the stew simmering back at camp. The market here is not a market in the way you know it. There's no tidy row of stalls with handwritten chalk prices. Instead, goods are traded from sleds, from the open hulls of beached boats, or simply from a fur mat laid on the snow. A man with hair braided into thick, icy ropes offers you amber beads from the Baltic, the honey-colored stones so warm-looking that you almost believe they could melt the frost on your hands. In exchange, he wants iron nails. Simple, sturdy things, but worth their weight when you live on shifting shores. Historians still argue whether these frozen trade meets were planned in advance or happened more opportunistically, based on where the ice held firm that year. The fact remains, though, that the very geography dictated the economy. A river mouth that stayed open through winter might become a hub one season, then vanish under thick ice the next. Traders learned to adapt, bringing whatever goods could endure the journey without spoiling. Salted fish, beeswax candles, and carved bone dice change hands with as much importance as bolts of fine cloth from Frankish looms. You pause at a fur trader's mat, brushing your fingers over a pelt so thick it feels like it could block the wind entirely. He claims it came from a bear, taken during a hunt that nearly killed his cousin, although you're not sure whether the cousin or the bear had the upper hand for most of the fight. For a moment, you imagine wrapping it around your shoulders, walking back into camp like one of those sagas come to life. But you know better. That pelt could buy you enough smoked fish to last the month. And practical thinking always wins in a place where storms can seal you in for days. A quirky little barter catches your attention. A trader from the east producing a bundle of dried herbs tied with red string. He swears it's good for keeping the cold spirits away. And even if you don't believe in such things, you can't deny the pleasant smell. A strange blend of pine resin and something like mint. You trade him a length of wool yarn, not because you need the herbs, but because trading feels like the heartbeat of this camp. It's the ritual, the movement of goods, the chatter of half-frozen voices negotiating in at least 3 different languages that keeps the place alive. You notice a small group huddled around a flat sled, where a man has set out what look like simple wooden bowls. But when you lift one, the grain catches the light, revealing a delicate carved scene inside. A longship cutting through stylized waves, tiny enough that the whole scene could fit in the palm of your hand. You can't help but admire the patience it must have taken to make such a thing when every gust of wind threatens to freeze the blood in your fingers. As the sun hangs low, the market begins to thin. Those who've traded well pack their goods carefully, tucking them deep in sleds beneath layers of fur. A few linger, hoping for one last bargain. But the shadows grow long, and the temperature starts to drop again. You follow the slow stream of people back toward the campfires, the sounds of the market fading into the soft crunch of boots over snow. Back in camp, the traders display their new acquisitions to the others, each piece carrying its own story, half-truth, or embellishment. You watch as a man pulls out a brass brooch shaped like a bird, the metal catching what little light remains. He claims it came from the hands of a master smith in Hedeby, but you suspect he just likes how the name rolls off the tongue. And honestly, it doesn't matter. The object is as much about the tale as it is about the truth. That night, the camp feels richer, not just in goods, but in the subtle energy of trade completed. Stomachs are fuller, shoulders are warmer, and the promise of another day of barter lingers in the air. You settle into your furs, the scent of that strange eastern herb drifting from the pouch by your head, wondering whether tomorrow will bring the same faces or entirely new ones. Out here, the ice is never permanent, and neither are the people who cross it. The shoreline feels different tonight. The snow has deepened, muffling each step until the only sound is the squeak of your boots and the crunch when the crust gives way. The fire circle is smaller now. Wood is scarce this far into the season. You and the others have been rationing fuel, burning only at night when the cold feels like it's seeping into your bones. The flames throw a warm orange glow over faces that look a little leaner than they did weeks ago, and you notice that everyone's beards are crusted with frost. You breathe into your hands, feeling your knuckles ache with that strange, deep cold that makes you want to keep moving, even when you're exhausted. A few men are mending nets by the light of the fire, their fingers moving slowly as if half numb. The nets themselves are stiff with salt and ice, and repairing them requires patience you're not sure you'd have. Every so often, someone glances toward the dark sea, where faint cracks and shifting noises remind you that the ice is still alive, still moving beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether these encampments were more about seasonal trade convenience or sheer necessity. But tonight, either way, you're here, and the idea of packing up for a warmer climate feels like a fantasy. There's a pile of goods under a thick tarp. Dried fish, furs, amber beads, and one small chest that holds what might be your camp's most valuable currency: iron tools. These are guarded not because someone might steal them from within the camp, but because you never know who might arrive from the darkness beyond it. Trade on frozen shores wasn't always between friends. Sometimes another group might come offering goods. Sometimes they came simply to take. That's why the sentries stand a little further out than usual tonight, posted behind snowdrifts that double as cover. One trader returns from a walk along the perimeter, shaking snow from his shoulders. He reports that the sea ice is building thicker in the shallows, but there's a narrow channel still open near the point. This is good news. It means incoming ships can still find their way to you, even in the coldest weeks. But it also means a predator, human or otherwise, could as well. You can't help but remember the old camp stories of night raids, when the only warning was a change in the sound of the wind, followed by the quick clatter of weapons. As the night wears on, the conversation turns to barter strategy. Some argue that the camp should trade away surplus furs now before they lose value. Others think holding on to them will make them more valuable in early spring when supplies run thin elsewhere. It's a slow, drawn-out debate, punctuated by yawns and the occasional sarcastic jab about who's the better negotiator. You suspect the sarcasm is partly to keep spirits up. Humor is easier than thinking about how long winter still has left to run. Someone pulls out a small drinking horn, passing it around with a warning that there's barely any mead left. When it reaches you, the taste is sharp and sweet, warming your throat just enough to make you wish for more. But here, every drop is precious, so you hand it on without complaint. A fringe bit of lore floats into conversation. Someone swears they once heard of a winter so long and cold that traders boiled their own leather straps into soup to survive. You decide you'd rather not find out if that's possible. The camp dogs stir suddenly, their ears pricking toward the ice channel. Every head turns. In the distance, a faint rhythmic sound, a hollow knock like wood on wood, carries over the frozen water. It could be ice shifting, or oars striking the hull of a boat. No one moves at first, waiting for the noise to repeat. When it does, there's a ripple of movement, men reaching for spears, the sentries shifting their stance. Your heart ticks faster, though part of you wonders if this might mean fresh trade, new stories, maybe even a pouch of spices from far-off markets. The fire pops, sending a small shower of sparks into the night air. You pull your cloak tighter, waiting, watching the channel. The sound grows clearer, and you think you can make out the faint silhouette of a prow against the lighter gray of the ice. Friend or foe? It's impossible to say yet, but you realize that, out here, uncertainty is as much a part of camp life as the cold itself. The morning after that night of muffled wind and frost-tipped hair, you stir in your furs, blink against a pale glow filtering through the hide flap, and hear the creak of ice shifting somewhere out on the water. You don't rush. You rarely do now. Moving slowly has become a way of conserving heat, of conserving patience. You step out, boots crunching, and the camp is still. Breath clouds rising like small campfire smoke from the few souls already awake. Out on the edge of the shore, the tide has done something strange, pushing thin sheets of ice against each other so they pile in jagged shards, each one catching the sunlight like dull glass. This is the final stretch of your winter on these frozen shores, though you don't know exactly which day the thaw will come. The traders have begun to speak in more animated tones now, a bit more laughter, a bit more teasing about who owes who for the winter's wagers, who could carry the heaviest barrel, who'd make it the longest without a shave. The bonds built here are peculiar, strong in their way, but you all know that the sea will scatter you soon enough, back to towns, to farms, to the next set of deals. Still, there's a comfort in having survived together. Your tasks are gentler now. You check the ship each day, brushing away the snow that tries to claim the deck, clearing the ropes from ice, letting your hands memorize the feel of the wood again. You stack trade goods neatly, furs wrapped, amber in pouches, a few new trinkets acquired from local fishermen. Historians still argue whether Viking traders saw this seasonal trade as purely business or as a form of community ritual, returning to the same frozen bays year after year to reaffirm bonds with locals. Looking around, you think maybe it's both. One evening, as the sun dips low and spills a buttery light over the snow, you help haul in the last heavy nets of the season. They're thick with ice, gloved hands slipping, and you and the fisherman beside you exchange a grin that says you're both just a little done with this winter. Over by the longhouse, someone is boiling down the last of the dried fish into a stew, so thick it could almost be carved. And you catch yourself imagining the taste of fresh bread you'll find when you finally head south. There's a quirky tradition here. Before leaving, everyone in camp takes a small, smooth stone from the shore and tucks it into their belt pouch. The idea is that it carries the place with you, so that when you reach your next port, you can hold it and remember the sound of ice groaning under a heavy moon. You've got yours already, chosen on a morning when the frost painted fern-shaped patterns across the inside of your shelter's hide walls. The last night comes with little ceremony. The stars are so bright, they almost feel near enough to warm your cheeks. You lie back on a fur-lined bench outside the longhouse, boots propped up, and think of the first time you set foot here in the biting wind, unsure if you'd even make it through the first week. You did more than make it. You learned the rhythms of the shore, the stubbornness of frozen ropes, the way a single ember can keep a tent livable through the longest night. This part of the story moves slowly, as if afraid to disturb your rest. It unfolds in the quiet way leaves turn in the wind, small, gentle, inevitable. You're barely here, and yet, somehow, you're exactly where you need to be. So let's go on, softly, deeper into the memory. We're stepping straight into the vast darkness of the Arctic in midwinter. No sun, no twilight, just an unbroken curtain of black pressing against the walls of a snow-packed shelter. The wind outside isn't just cold. It's the kind of cold that feels like it's actively looking for a way to kill you. And in this frozen stretch of night that lasts for months, you'd better believe you need more than a good blanket to get any sleep. You probably won't survive this without some serious preparation. And no, your heated electric throw from Amazon isn't going to cut it. You find yourself in an Inuit settlement, tucked low against the snow-covered land to avoid the worst of the wind. Every step you take feels like wading through invisible syrup made of ice. Your boots crunching on a crust of snow hardened by days of frost. The air burns your nostrils, your eyelashes crust with tiny icicles, and your breath clouds into instant frost. You push open the low entrance to a domed igloo. Yes, an igloo, but not the cartoon-perfect dome with a little chimney you might be picturing. This one is compact, efficient, and utterly quiet, except for the faint sound of a seal oil lamp sputtering in the corner. Inside, the smell of animal hides, faint smoke, and the tang of oil greets you. The temperature is still cold by your city apartment standards, but compared to the outside, it's paradise. You can almost hear your bones sighing in relief. This is where families spend their nights, curled together in one communal sleeping platform, a raised bench made of packed snow covered with caribou hides. The hides are thick, their hollow hairs trapping warm air, and when you press your hand into them, they almost feel alive with retained heat. The sleeping arrangement isn't about privacy. Everyone's in the same space, pressed side by side, sometimes even sharing breath for warmth. In the deep polar night, heat is communal currency. Your place in the pile isn't negotiable. It's survival. Babies, elders, hunters, all arranged in a way that keeps the most vulnerable in the warmest spots. If you think your memory Foam mattress topper is luxury. Try the feeling of your heartbeat slowing as shared warmth seeps back into your limbs after a day in the open air. And no, they didn't just rely on bodies. The seal oil lamp, a kulik, is the heart of the igloo. Its flame isn't just for light, it's for cooking, drying clothes, and keeping the air above freezing. But it needs careful tending, because too much smoke will choke the air, and too little heat will let frost creep back into the room. The lamp's shallow dish is carved from soapstone, filled with oil rendered from seal blubber, and its wick is made of dried moss or cotton grass. The glow is soft, flickering, and hypnotic. You might find yourself staring into it like a modern person scrolls through TikTok. Clothing plays its role too. Though once inside for the night, heavy outerwear comes off, replaced with softer, lighter furs worn close to the skin. Sleeping in damp clothing would be a one-way ticket to hypothermia, so every layer is inspected and dried carefully. Historians still argue whether certain layering techniques, like sleeping naked inside your furs, were common practice or just occasional necessity. But everyone agrees that staying dry was a non-negotiable survival rule. Here's a quirky detail. While Westerners today obsess over weighted blankets, Inuit sleepers already had their version. Hides layered so heavily that you could hardly move underneath. The weight wasn't for anxiety relief. It was to keep heat from escaping every time someone shifted. You settle in, hearing the occasional sigh or low murmur from other sleepers. Outside, the wind scrapes across the igloo walls like sandpaper on bone. But here, cocooned in shared warmth, you're insulated from the vast and merciless night. Your eyes adjust to the dim glow. Your breathing matches the slow rhythm of those around you. And the Arctic becomes, for just a few hours, a little less deadly. The weeks stretch into months, and now the ice outside groans like a living thing. You lie there in the dim amber glow of a single seal oil lamp, its little flame swaying each time a draft sneaks through the tunnel entrance. The air smells faintly of the ocean, the scent clinging to parkas and mittens hung above you. Tonight, you're not just keeping warm, you're entering that unspoken game of keeping the mind from wandering into dark places. The kind that can creep in when the sun has been absent for far too long. You reach for a strip of dried char, chewing slowly, feeling it soften and release that deep, earthy flavor of smoked fish. Food isn't just sustenance here. It's a memory trigger, a quiet reassurance. Every bite says, you're still here, still surviving. Historians still argue whether this kind of food preservation, air drying in the summer to prepare for the endless night, was perfected here first or borrowed from coastal trade networks. But in this moment, you're less interested in academic debates and more in the comforting chew of familiarity. Somewhere across the room, a grandmother begins humming, a low, wavering tune that seems to melt into the background. It's not quite a song you can name, but you know it's been sung for centuries. They say the melody keeps time with the breath, slowing the body down until even the most restless child starts drifting. You watch as the smallest one, wrapped in a fur-trimmed blanket, blinks once, twice, then surrenders to sleep. There's also the trick of telling stories in shifts, letting one person speak until their voice softens, then another takes over mid-sentence. That way, no mind is left unoccupied long enough for anxious thoughts to gain ground. Some stories are pure entertainment, like the one about the giant polar bear who tried to marry a fisherman's daughter. Others are sly teaching tools, reminding everyone how to read ice cracks or find air holes in a whiteout. Quirkier still are the shadow games, played with hands in front of the flickering lamp. You wouldn't think grown adults could be so invested in a contest to make the most convincing caribou or raven silhouette. But here, the stakes are bragging rights that might last until spring. Someone makes a surprisingly lifelike seal, prompting a burst of muffled laughter, which instantly makes the whole space feel warmer. The psychological shield is also built from small rituals: checking the lamp oil at the same hour, brushing frost from the tunnel walls before bed, running fingers over the same carved pattern on the sleeping platform. Modern psychology might call it grounding, but here it's just life. It's what lets you slip into sleep without wondering whether the snow above is holding steady. On certain rare nights, the wind dies completely, and the silence presses in so thick you can hear the faint shift of your own heartbeat. In that stillness, it's tempting to imagine you're the last human left in the world. But then someone shifts in their blanket, or a child sighs in their sleep, and you remember the truth. You're not alone. That truth is your anchor. There's a kind of humor here that only works in the dark. Someone might whisper a joke so dry it could freeze midair, and the laughter that follows is so quiet you can barely tell it's there. But it's real. A shared moment, a shared breath, a reminder that even here, under all this snow and night, joy still finds a way to exist. The longer you stay, the more you notice how the mind adapts. Your sense of time loosens, like a rope that no longer needs to be pulled tight. Days and nights blur into a single, unhurried existence. You find yourself listening to the rhythm of life in the igloo, as if it's music. The scrape of a spoon, the rustle of fur, the sigh of someone shifting in their sleep. And when you finally close your eyes, letting the world outside disappear, it feels as if the darkness is no longer pressing in, but wrapping around you like a second skin. You wake in the darkness, though wake is perhaps the wrong word, because your dreams and your waking hours are blurred into one long stretch of black velvet time. No sunbeam sneaks through the roof's seams. No thin wash of pre-dawn light bleeds over the horizon. The only illumination comes from the soft orange pulse of the lamp on the floor. A little bowl carved from soapstone, its surface etched with shallow grooves, worn smooth by decades of fingers refilling it. The fuel is seal oil with a moss wick, giving off that faint, greasy sweet scent that says both life and dinner. It's astonishingly efficient. One lamp, if carefully tended, can keep the sleeping space just warm enough for toes not to turn to ice blocks, and for your breath not to crystallize midair. You turn onto your side, adjusting the caribou fur blanket so the hollow hairs trap the heat against your body. You listen for movement, your neighbors, cousins, or perhaps just the old man in the corner, murmuring in his sleep. It's odd, but in the polar night, you never truly sleep through. Instead, you dip in and out of naps, drifting like sea ice, catching slivers of stories or songs, or waking to sip something hot before sinking back into warmth. Anthropologists call this segmented sleep, and historians still argue whether it was common before electric lighting, even in warmer climates. Here, though, it's simply survival. You sleep when the world allows, and you keep watch when it doesn't. Occasionally, a faint tap sounds from the far side of the structure, the polite knock of a neighbor braving the cold to borrow a scrap of lamp wick or share a slice of frozen fish. In this world, privacy is a luxury. An intrusion is often life-saving. You answer the knock with a grunt, pull your coat over your head, and wriggle free from the bedding's grip. Stepping outside is like diving face first into another planet. The air steals the moisture from your lungs instantly. Above, there's no moon tonight, only the sprawling shimmer of the aurora, green ribbons writhing so slowly you'd think they were alive and very patient. The quiet is so absolute that your own heartbeat feels loud. Then a faint crunch. A fox, small and red against the snow, prowling just beyond the glow of the doorway. You watch it for a moment before ducking back inside. The scent hits you first. A mix of drying fish and something sharp, almost medicinal. It comes from the corner where an elder is shaping a new kulik lamp from soapstone, the chips scattering into a neat pile. You watch her hands, steady, deliberate, guided by years of muscle memory. This lamp may be the most important object in the home. Without it, you'd have darkness, cold, and raw meat. With it, you have a hearth. You sit with her for a while, passing tools back and forth. She tells you how, when she was a girl, the lamps were bigger, the flame fatter, because seal hunting was easier then. Now, the ice changes faster. Seal holes form later, freeze earlier. She doesn't dwell on the hardship. It's just part of the rhythm, like breathing. Still, you notice her eyes linger on the wick, making sure not a drop of oil is wasted. By the time you crawl back into your bedding, the air inside has warmed just a fraction, enough to loosen your shoulders. Outside, the aurora's green has shifted to violet, faint but real, like the last bruise of daylight in a place that hasn't seen the sun for months. You don't think about when the light will return. Here, in the long polar night, that's a dangerous kind of counting. You think instead of the steady lamp, the fox's crunching steps, and the layered comfort of furs. Somewhere, someone begins a low hum, a song without words that melts into the dark. Your eyelids close, and the darkness swallows you again, not empty, but full of warmth, movement, and the muffled heartbeat of a world that sleeps and shifts. You shift again beneath the heavy sealskin blanket, listening to the faint crackle of the blubber lamp in the corner. Outside, the long polar night continues its silent watch, and inside, the air is rich with the scent of oil and warmth. This is the part of winter that outsiders rarely think about. Not just how Inuit families survive, but how they quietly thrive, drawing from each other in ways that keep the mind steady when the sun doesn't return for months. The darkness has become not a threat, but a companion, its presence shaping every rhythm of life inside these walls. In this endless twilight, there's a kind of creativity that flourishes. Without the rush of a summer hunt or the glare of daylight, hands turn to quieter tasks, stitching new boots from seal hide, repairing the kayak frame by the dim glow, weaving intricate patterns into mittens. A grandmother hums a tune so old that historians still argue whether it began as a lullaby or a work chant. You imagine each note carrying a memory, a fragment of the seasons before. The children, restless from too many hours indoors, invent games on the sleeping platform. Sometimes it's a quiet guessing game with carved ivory pieces shaped like seals and fish. Sometimes it's more boisterous, involving mock hunts or shadow animals cast on the wall. In these moments, the igloo becomes less of a shelter and more of a theater, laughter echoing softly through the rounded chamber. One fringe bit of lore claims that certain shadows, shaped in just the right way, can charm the night into passing faster. But you're not convinced, and neither probably are they. The adults keep an eye on the food stores, rationing out the dried char and frozen seal meat with care. Hunting trips still happen, but in these deep weeks, they're shorter, riskier, requiring every ounce of skill to navigate by stars and memory alone. The dogs sleep in a huddle just outside, their fur frosted over, their breathing rising in little clouds. You picture them dreaming of running over ice so bright it blinds, even though no such light exists right now. There are stories too, always stories. Tales of Sedna, the sea goddess, whose fingers became the seals and whales. Told in a voice so low, you have to lean in to hear. Legends of hunters who went too far onto the ice and met beings half human, half something else. These aren't just entertainment, they're warnings, lessons disguised in myth, and somewhere in between, someone will tell a completely ridiculous modern joke, like the one about the snowmobile that got lost in the igloo because someone forgot where they parked it. You don't laugh loudly because sound carries oddly in the night, but you still smile. The blubber lamp is refilled, its light never allowed to go out completely. In a place where the sun stays hidden, that flame becomes more than illumination. It's a heartbeat for the home. You find yourself glancing at it often, measuring time not by hours, but by how much the wick has burned down. Even in this intimate, tightly woven space, moments of solitude exist. Someone might step outside just to stand beneath the stars, so sharp and clear they almost feel close enough to touch. You join them in your mind, feeling the cold press against your skin, hearing the faint groan of shifting ice underfoot. There's no wind tonight, only the steady hush of a world paused in its deepest season. Inside again, you settle back among the sleeping bodies, each breath syncing with the next. You realize that the secret to enduring this long night isn't about conquering the cold or hoarding the most supplies. It's about learning to let the dark slow you down, to make peace with the quiet, and to find warmth not just in the fire, but in the closeness of others. The night stretches on, unbroken, but you're no longer counting the hours. Somewhere, in the distance, a dog stirs, and the lamp flame trembles slightly. But nothing disturbs the calm. It's not survival anymore. It's simply living, in rhythm with the deepest night on earth. The fire has burned low, the voices have grown hushed, and the world feels impossibly far away. You are floating now, through years you've never lived, in places you've never seen. There is no hurry, no reason to turn back. Let us step carefully into the next moment and see where it leads. We're stepping into a quiet, moon-silvered orchard somewhere in the English countryside, and you're about to learn the surprisingly clever, sometimes ridiculous ways 18th century farmers kept frost from stealing their apple harvests. Imagine a chilly April night where your breath curls in pale clouds, your fingers ache inside thin gloves, And somewhere in the dark, a farmer is setting something on fire. Not to burn the orchard down, but to keep it alive. You might think, well, that's charming. I could survive a night like this. But trust me, you probably wouldn't survive the damp, bone-deep cold, the relentless wakefulness, or the boredom of staring at fruit trees for hours on end while your toes slowly turn to icicles. You stand in the orchard with frost warnings hanging over the land like a whispered threat. The air is raw and damp, and every blade of grass glitters faintly with the first hints of ice. Farmers in the 1700s knew that frost could wipe out months of work in a single night. Flowers would blacken, fruit would never form, and an entire season's income could vanish with the sunrise. The main trick? Heat. Not enough to bake the apples before they were even picked, but just enough to keep the temperature from dipping below that fatal freezing point. So here you are, watching as a group of farmhands begin rolling out curious metal contraptions. Big, squat, iron pots set up on short stands. These are called smudge pots, though in the 18th century they might be little more than old kettles or barrels with holes punched in the sides. Into them goes a mix of damp straw, manure, and sometimes oily rags. The goal isn't a clean flame. It's the opposite. Thick, choking smoke billows out, drifting through the orchard and settling like a protective blanket over the blossoms. The smell is, well, imagine someone lit a campfire inside a cow barn. But it works. The smoke traps heat, reduces radiation cooling, and creates a microclimate just warm enough to hold the frost at bay. Mainstream fact? This method, smoke frosting, was so effective that variations of it were still being used in the early 20th century, especially in vineyards. But in the 1700s, it was a rough, labor-intensive job. You'd have to keep the fires going all night, feeding them every couple of hours. The irony is that the people doing it probably inhaled enough smoke to shorten their lives, all in the name of saving apples. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some farmers swore by adding fresh horse manure to the smudge fires because they believed the steam carried life-giving warmth into the blossoms. The actual science? Well, yes, steam is warm, but the idea that the plants could somehow breathe health from it was more hopeful poetry than reality. Still, it's one of those little human touches. Someone cared enough to try every weird idea in the book if it meant more fruit in the fall. And here's where historians still argue. Did these smoke blankets genuinely raise the air temperature enough to save crops? Or was their main benefit just reducing visible frost crystals from forming on petals? The truth might be somewhere in between. Some modern agricultural studies suggest that while the temperature boost was modest, the psychological comfort of doing something against frost was almost as valuable as the science. After all, standing idle while your orchard froze felt like surrender. As the night deepens, the glow of dozens of small fires paints the trees in flickering gold. You can hear the hiss of damp fuel, the occasional crackle of a twig, and the muffled cough of a farmhand shifting in the cold. Somewhere, a kettle of tea sits dangerously close to the flames, its steam curling upward and mingling with the smoke. The scene is equal parts beautiful and grim, a kind of nocturnal vigil where the farmers keep watch over sleeping trees, each puff of smoke a silent prayer for spring to hold on just a little longer. If you walk through the rows, you'll notice that the fires aren't placed right next to the trunks, but spaced in such a way that the smoke drifts evenly between trees. Too close, and you'd scorch the bark. Too far, and the frost could creep in unhindered. These farmers didn't have thermometers to measure the orchard's microclimate. They judged by the feel of the air on their skin, the look of the breath from their mouths, even the sound of leaves stiffening in the cold. At around 3 in the morning, when the night is at its coldest, the smoke is at its thickest. You're tired now, your eyes stinging from the acrid haze, your hair smelling faintly of burnt straw. Somewhere deep inside, you realize this is a kind of shared endurance test. Not just for you, but for everyone who ever worked a farm. There's a strange comfort in that. It's an unbroken chain of stubbornness, stretching back through centuries of cold spring nights, each one lit by these low, smoldering fires in the dark. By the time the first pale light of dawn filters in, the frost has failed to bite. The petals are safe. The trees still hold their promise of fruit. And the farmers, bleary-eyed and coughing, can finally go home. You trail behind them, feet crunching over frost-dusted grass that somehow survived the night without freezing solid. And you think, this was only night 1. There could be dozens more before the season turns. By now, you've walked past those flickering frost fires and seen your breath hanging like miniature clouds above the furrows. But the orchard isn't just passively waiting for the cold to pass. You're part of a living, breathing experiment in defying nature's chill. The first thing you notice tonight is the peculiar sound, an irregular chime, like an ill-tuned orchestra warming up in the dark. It's not music. Exactly, but the tink-tink of glass bottles strung up in trees, each clinking as the wind nudges them. The farmers swear the noise keeps deer and other nibblers away when the frost makes food scarce, though you're half convinced it's just an excuse to recycle whatever didn't make it back from the tavern. In the distance, another farmer is climbing a ladder to place what looks like a woolen scarf around a branch heavy with buds. Not for decoration. Those are strips of thick fabric soaked in brine. The salt in the wet fibers slows freezing just enough to give the tree a fighting chance. Historians still argue whether this technique actually saved more fruit than it ruined, since salt can be as much a killer as frost. But in desperate years, anything was worth trying. You stand close enough to smell the faint tang of salt water and old cloth. Your own role tonight is tending the braziers placed strategically through the orchard. The trick isn't just to light them, but to light them in the right order, letting the warm air drift slowly over the ground. If you rush, the heat will rise too quickly and vanish into the night sky. Too slow, and the frost settles before you can break its grip. Somewhere in the quiet, you recall the farmer's son explaining the inversion layer, a pocket of slightly warmer air above the orchard that, if coaxed down with smoke or warmth, can protect the buds like an invisible blanket. Science, whispered into practice by hands calloused from generations of trial and error. And then there are the bells, not church bells, but small, handheld ones rung at intervals, signaling when to rotate duties or adjust fires. You imagine this is what midnight in a monastery orchard might have sounded like. Fewer hymns, more swearing about cold toes. One bell call is for tending fires, 2 for checking covers, 3 for hauling more fuel from the shed. You listen for your signal, trying to ignore how the damp is finding its way into your bones. Every so often, you pass the cider barrels stored nearby. They're not here by accident. The farmers insist that keeping the barrels warm prevents the liquid inside from freezing and bursting the wood. But you can't help but suspect that warming the cider is as much about morale as preservation. After all, a mug of steaming cider is exactly the kind of bribe that keeps you willing to shuffle from fire to fire in the small hours. As the night drags on, you notice a farmer adjusting a curious contraption. What looks like a giant canvas wing propped on a pole. He swings it back and forth, pushing warm air toward the colder, low spots in the orchard. It's exhausting work, and you're quietly grateful you weren't assigned that task. Historians still debate whether these frost fans were inspired by ship sails or church banners. Either way, it's a reminder that sometimes the most practical tools look like carnival props. And then there's the beeswax trick. Tiny candles, placed in clusters near the most vulnerable buds. You'd think it would take thousands to make any difference, but the old beekeepers claim the heat from a few dozen, set just right, can be enough to stop ice from forming. It's fiddly, slow, and entirely dependent on a still night. But you've seen it work once, and it felt like watching a secret pact between man and nature. By the time your watch is nearly over, the orchard has become a patchwork of light and shadow, smoke curling lazily under the moon, buds glistening with dew instead of frost, and the faint, hopeful smell of warmed earth. The air is still cold enough to bite, but you know, in that stubborn farmer way, that every degree you've stolen back from winter tonight might mean another barrel of apples come harvest. And even if historians keep arguing about which method mattered most, you've just seen the truth for yourself. It's the layering of all these odd, clever, slightly desperate tricks that keeps the orchard alive through the night. By now, you're standing in the deep dark of an April night. The kind of night where the stars feel close enough to pluck like cold apples from the sky. Your breath streams in front of you, visible in the flicker of the oil lantern you carry. The orchard looks like some strange battlefield. Tall wooden posts, every few rows, topped with flat metal pans. These aren't for cooking, they're frost alarms. You've already spent the afternoon setting them. The idea being that as frost crystals form, the pans pick up the sound of ice clinking. Tiny, delicate chimes telling you to act. And you will act, even if it means stumbling around here at 3 a.m. Because one missed frost could mean an entire year's harvest gone. But sound is only part of the game. Tonight, you're doing something that feels oddly modern. Reading the air. You step to a small clearing where you've driven a slender stake into the ground, with a thermometer hanging chest high. This isn't just any thermometer. It's the 18th century farmer's prized frost glass, a thin glass tube filled with colored spirit, far more sensitive than the mercury types. You bend close, squint at the line. It's falling, slow but steady, toward that dangerous zone just above freezing. Somewhere, an owl calls. Somewhere else, a fox yips once, then fades. You note the sound, but your brain's already running through the checklist. Lanterns ready, smudge pots lit, wool scarves at the neck. The smudge pots are the heart of tonight's ritual. Picture squat iron kettles filled with a mix of damp straw, sawdust, and whatever slow-burning waste you can scrounge. You light them carefully, encouraging them to smolder rather than blaze. The smoke curls low over the ground, carrying heat and creating a thin blanket that keeps the cold from settling on the blossoms. It's not pleasant. You cough, your eyes sting, and you start smelling faintly like a chimney sweep, but it's effective. Mainstream agricultural historians will tell you smudging saved more crops than any other frost-fighting method in that era. Of course, they also note it made whole villages smell like a ship's hold, so the neighbors weren't always thrilled. Between the smudge pots, you're also employing a quieter tactic: earthen walls. Earlier in the week, you built low ridges of soil around certain sections of the orchard. They're only knee-high, but they trap warmer air inside, making little microclimates. You learned this trick from an older farmer who swore his grandfather brought it from France. Whether that's true or not, historians still argue whether the technique was purely Old World or if it evolved independently here. Either way, you're grateful for it tonight, because the blossoms inside those earthen rings have a softer look to them, less brittle in the chill. From time to time, you walk to the edge of the orchard to check the wind machines. Big wooden fans, powered by hand cranks. They're crude by modern standards, but they do stir the air just enough to prevent cold pockets from forming. You take your turn cranking, feeling the resistance in your shoulders. The fans groan, their blades cutting through the night with a slow, steady rhythm, mixing warmer air from above with the cold that wants to settle on your trees. You try not to think about how many more hours until dawn, but the mental math happens anyway. 4, maybe 5. There's a strange intimacy to this work. You're not just protecting trees, you're protecting a future version of yourself. The one who will bite into a ripe apple in September. And remember this long night, the taste of smoke in your throat, the hiss of damp straw as it burns. You glance at the thermometer again, still dropping. You mutter something under your breath, half prayer, half complaint, and keep moving. You light another smudge pot, adjust a fan's angle, run your gloved hand along a branch to feel if frost is trying to sneak in. And then comes the moment you've been dreading. The sound. A delicate, almost imperceptible tinkling from one of the frost alarm pans. It's beautiful, in a way, but also a gut punch. Frost has arrived. You quicken your pace, lighting more smudge pots, waving smoke toward the most vulnerable rows. You find yourself muttering at the trees like old friends, telling them to hang on just a little longer, as if they might listen. Your world narrows to lantern light, the smell of smoke, and the sound of your own footsteps crunching on frozen grass. Somewhere beyond the orchard, the rest of the world sleeps, unaware that here, in this patch of night, you're locked in a slow, quiet battle. The temperature hovers just above disaster, and you keep walking, tending, stoking, because you know the sun will come, eventually. By the time the frost has fully descended, the orchard is quiet in a way you can almost hear. Like the absence of sound has its own presence, hovering just above the trees. You are moving slowly now, as though each step is part of a final inscription. Your boots pressing into the soil with the weight of the entire season behind them. The night air clings to you, heavy with the faint, earthy tang of turned dirt and the dry, almost papery scent of old straw left out too long. The trees stand in solemn rows, their black silhouettes stretching up into a sky that has turned that pale, faintly luminous silver only seen on the coldest nights. You stop by one of the smudge pots, its metal body radiating a gentle, low heat, like the belly of a sleeping animal. It coughs out another puff of oily smoke, which lingers, reluctant to leave. The warmth is small in the scale of the world, but to the delicate blossoms overhead, it's a shield, a bubble against the creeping freeze. Your gloved hand rests on the rim, just long enough to feel the metal's warmth seep in, and you imagine the whole orchard as a collection of these tiny warmth islands. Their combined effort like a ragtag army holding off an invisible enemy. Historians still argue whether this smudge pot era was more about science or superstition. The chemistry is there, dense smoke trapping heat close to the ground. But the ritual of it, the stubbornness to light pot after pot, even when frost warnings didn't always materialize, feels almost ceremonial. Quirky records from the late 18th century even note farmers who swore by whispering to the trees while tending the fires, claiming that a calm, low voice would keep the blossoms from closing in on themselves before morning. That belief may have no grounding in physics, but then again, farming has never been purely about physics. It's as much about hope as it is about soil. You walk on, noting the windbreaks you set up weeks earlier. Rows of brush and bundled reeds still standing in the cold, forming walls that slow the icy breath sweeping in from the open fields. Some farmers swore by more elaborate windbreaks, planted hedgerows, stone walls, even abandoned carts parked just so, but yours are humble and practical. They cast long shadows under the moonlight, angular and still, like the orchard's own sentries. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a dull thunk, the sound of a frost fan turning lazily in the breeze. The blades catch pockets of warmer air high above and push them down into the orchard. It's a method both ancient in concept and startlingly modern in execution. The 18th century equivalent was climbing into the trees with long poles to shake off frost crystals before they could harden. A tedious and freezing task that, mercifully, you aren't doing tonight. Your breath fogs the air as you tilt your head back. The stars look almost sharper in the cold, each one etched into place as if someone had scraped away the black sky with the fine point of a blade. The moon watches all of this with its indifferent glow, silvering the smudge pots, the branches, your own gloved hands. It feels, in a strange way, like the orchard is holding its breath with you, waiting to see if the night will relent. In the moments between tending fires, adjusting covers, and checking for ice on the petals, you find yourself just listening. Not for anything in particular, but for that subtle shift in the air that hints at dawn. A faint light might already be pooling low on the eastern horizon, but you're in no hurry. You know that, historically, this is the part of the night when farmers begin to feel both relief and dread. Relief because the frost season's hardest hours are ending. Dread because they'll only know the true damage when the sun rises and warms the orchard enough to inspect each blossom. Quirky advice from an 18th century farming journal floats to mind. Never walk the orchard too quickly after frost, it claimed, because the blossoms wake more gently if you move among them slowly. Whether that's botany or pure poetry, it lingers in your thoughts as you take another measured step forward, past the last smudge pot, past the final row of trees. The night has given all it can, and now it's just a matter of waiting, letting the orchard's defenses hold steady until the first faint rays break over the horizon. You stand there in the hush, your breath steady, the orchard still, and for a moment you feel as much a part of it as any branch, any root, any drifting curl of smoke.